All right, we'll go ahead and get started. So my name is Brandon Zeerip, and I'm an enterprise account executive from a company called Celonis, based in the Midwest. I reside in the Ann Arbor, where our Midwest region is based out of Chicago and Ann Arbor. But I've been at Celonis for about 13 months now, and it's been a very exciting time to be part of a technology company that's really one of the front runners in terms of process excellence, of being one of the leading disruptors. So in terms of a show of hands, who here is familiar with process mining or has heard of process mining before? Just so I can gauge the room. So maybe 40% of you? Okay, great. So with Celonis, what we at a high level do is turn processes into extraordinary experiences for everybody. And I've been here with Celonis for about 13 months. The time that I've been here, I was about employee number 380. Today we've grown to over 700 employees. And from an ARR perspective, we've grown to over $100 million from an annual revenue perspective. And when I first started, we had just about $1 billion valuation, and today, 13 months later, we're at about a $2 billion valuation. So it's been really exciting to be part of such a company who's growing so quickly, but also that's profitable. So the combination of all those factors and being profitable is really cool to be part of such a unicorn. So in terms of what we do, I'm sure many of you are familiar with traditional process mapping. So we help companies to accelerate their enterprise by enhancing process excellence or process performance. And just looking at some of our customers, this is an exhaustive list, but you can see that we're measuring processes for companies across all major verticals. And as you can imagine, across all these different verticals, there are different types of business processes that are important to these different organizations, but also there's a variety of different source systems or ERP systems, CRM systems, ITSM, any transactional system of record that companies are running their processes on. And so Celonis is able to connect across any source system. So we're process agnostic and source system agnostic, which means any business process you can think of across any combination of source systems. We're able to give you a real-time digital twin of what your business process looks like and how it's operating. So just to give you an objective third-party lens of who Celonis is, all these logos at the bottom here have done various reports and rankings on process mining, and the common theme for that is that Celonis is named as the market leader. Rob Kolpovitz, he's a VP at Forrester who covers process automation, and Celonis is his most inquired company there. And to give you a little more of a pointed snapshot for Gartner, they defined the market of process mining just over 2 years ago, and they've released 2 market guides on process mining up until now. And each of their guides, they named Celonis as the market leader. And Harvard Business Review did a recent article where they talk about process excellence has always been important for companies, but up until process mining technology, the traditional method of trying to improve your processes is done through traditional process mapping. And some of the shortfalls with that is that it's extremely timely and expensive, but also it's really hard to have a concrete and data-driven perspective as to how the processes are operating across all the information systems that are present where your process operates. So unless you have a foundational understanding and a fundamental perspective of how the end-to-end process is executing from an as-is perspective, from a data-driven point of view, it's really hard to have knowledge into the best way that you can drive positive business outcomes, such as automation or compliance or whatever the case may be, customer experience. Really some of the key things that I'm sure you all are focusing on in one degree or another. It's impossible to understand how to best drive those things without full end-to-end transparency and visibility of the processes before moving on to the more important positive business outcomes. So again, what we do is we turn processes into extraordinary experiences, and how we do that is we provide an objective, data-driven lens where Celonis is able to connect across all your source systems and stitch across, again, it might be 5 or 10 or even more different source systems that are involved in a single business process. And at a high level with our proprietary technology, we're essentially doing 3 things that we're putting through our technology that we're able to capture that's present in every single source system or every transactional record that your company is operating on. So again, whether that's an off-the-shelf system like Oracle or SAP or Ariba, Salesforce, you name it, we have all standard connectors for those different platforms. But for any custom homegrown systems as well, we're able to connect to those also. And that's because, again, there's three things that we're essentially capturing and running through our proprietary technology. One is a date and timestamp. So every single time that an activity is logged in your source system, there's an associated timestamp associated with that. Two is an activity name. So for instance, let's say you have SAP, there's going to be a corresponding table and column that's associated with specific tasks and activities that are recorded whenever things are done in your source system. And then three is a unique identifier. So looking at purchase to pay, there'd be a unique purchase order line item number that allows us to capture the entire sequence from beginning to end of that entire business process to give you, again, a real-time digital twin of how your process is operating. And with those three things, a lot of the common use cases that our companies are using Celonis for there's really three buckets. So one has to do with customer experience, customer satisfaction, or NPS, oftentimes how it's measured. Second would be productivity and automation. And third would be risk and compliance. And I'll go into some customer stories of how we're actually lending to those areas. But before I do that, just to kind of give a contrast between process mapping to process mining and how Celonis got to enterprise performance acceleration, I'll just touch on the traditional methods of process mapping until a technology such as process mining was invented. So in the old method, I'm sure you all have in some capacity been involved with discovery workshops where there's sticky notes, whiteboards, interviews where third-party consultants come in to your organization and sit down and interview people to understand how the process is performing. And oftentimes feedback I hear is that those activities are emotionally charged, so not necessarily intentionally, but people think they understand how their processes are running, and so oftentimes it's not the most objective, data-driven approach as to how the process actually runs. Two is it's very lengthy and costly, so these engagements can take, as you all know, anywhere from a few months to closer to a year. And then three, just as importantly, is oftentimes these are static one-time snapshots. So I'm working with a Fortune 100 company in the Midwest, and they had estimated that just for one process using their own internal resources, it would take at least 9 months per process to create a digital twin, but just a static snapshot. And as you all know, after a couple of months, the process changes because systems change, people change, and there's a lot going on. So even when you do get that digital twin of a static one-time look, it's irrelevant after a couple months at best. And then fast forwarding over to Celonis with our process mining technology, what we do is, again, connecting to those underlying source systems, give you a transparent, objective, data-driven viewpoint as to how the as-is process is actually being executed. Two is that it's immediate. So we're giving you a living, breathing, real-time digital twin so you can understand down to the day by day or hour by hour, minute by minute, how your processes are actually being executed. And then lastly, how we really shifted from process mining to enterprise performance acceleration is we're able to take the historical information about your processes and then layer it on top of the context of your processes today so that we can tell you before things happen based off of historical markers what's going to happen next and how you can ultimately operationalize the insights about your process to work more intelligently in the business. So a couple of examples, Uber, they're a big customer of ours on customer experience. They were able to significantly increase their CSAT, which is their metric they use to measure customer experience, but by over 30%, and that resulted in more than 17 million happier customer calls or better rated customer calls. Siemens, I'll touch on Siemens a little bit more. They had an initiative within order to cash where they were trying to understand how to intelligently automate their processes. I'm sure that's something that's very popular for many of your companies here. But one thing that they realized is it's not going to pay off to just buy a bunch of bots and throw them into the process. They realize that if you don't have the end-to-end visibility of how your process is operating for an objective viewpoint, if you throw bots into the process, you might just make bad processes happen faster in certain parts. So they understood with Celonis, the holistic perspective is where should I automate versus where should I not automate, but also where are other places that automation is not relevant or I can use forms of back-end automation instead of tools like RPA. So being a strategic standpoint of what should we be applying and where from an intelligent automation perspective is really how Siemens saw tremendous success with Celonis. So just one part of one process for order to cash, they were able to intelligently identify which activities were most ripe for automation versus which ones were not, or other technologies made more sense. And so as a result, they were able to eliminate more than 10 million manual activities in their order-to-cash process, which translates to $15 million in savings annually. And today, Siemens is measuring more than 100 processes across the entire organization. They've got over a terabyte of data running through Celonis, and they have a very complex ERP landscape and other information systems as well. But just from an ERP perspective alone, they have more than 70 SAP ERP instances, and then they have more than 30 homegrown systems across the entire enterprise. So when it comes to complex processes where business processes from end to end are touching multiple systems as it jumps through the process, that's really something that's extremely powerful, as I mentioned earlier, is having that source system agnostic ability to understand how the process unfolds no matter how many places it's touching. And then Vodafone is another big one from a compliance perspective, being able to improve their perfect POs by more than 10%, which translated to millions of dollars of savings for their organization. And then also, oftentimes, a lot of companies, their auditing departments will use Celonis to help them understand how can they mitigate risk and reduce the external spend associated with having their processes to be compliant to their standards that are needed. And so before I go into the demo, I'm just going to, at a high level, explain the Intelligent Business Cloud and what I'm going to highlight in each aspect of it so that it will make more sense. So the connect piece, here is how I mentioned earlier, those three key pieces of information that we need in order to create that business process digital twin. Again, we're connecting to the underlying source systems. And so it could be an ERP, could be a CRM, an ITSM, any information system that's present. Today we have more than 600 standard connectors across for any off-the-shelf system that you may be using today. But also we have APIs, so where if you have a custom ERP system like Siemens, where we had over 30, we're able to still extract the necessary information because unless it's even more ancient than a mainframe system, we're still able to extract, again, those three key pieces of information in the transactional data. So next I'll talk on Discover with the Discover Enhanced methodology. So from a discovery standpoint, since we capture all those digital footprints, we give you an end-to-end digital twin of how the process unfolds and all the different variations or different ways that every single, let's say for in P2P, every single purchase order unfolds through the system. But also more importantly, we can pull in the dimensional data that's present within your source systems, such as SAP, and start to provide you with a root cause understanding of what's driving those inefficiencies and bottlenecks that we'll uncover. And then really this left side of the screen here, this is process mining. So you might be able to find other companies who can do process mining to some extent, where it might take months up to a year to build out the digital twin, but where Celonis really sets ourselves apart from any other competition is how we operationalize the insights about your processes so that in the day-to-day operations, the business and the process owners can go in and make a change that are going to ultimately move the needle the most. So with the next piece for Enhance, as I mentioned earlier, we're able to understand, more importantly, based off of the historical data and any violations that are unfolding today, what are the most pressing activities that can be acted upon today to ultimately drive and improve things like working capital or to reduce throughput time and improve a better customer experience, or reduce rework, or drive better compliance within the organization. We're able to surface those insights in real time so that you can ultimately proactively improve the business instead of having a post-mortem viewpoint within the business. And then lastly, from a monitor standpoint, after you've had all these insights that you've been able to operationalize, it's also important to be able to demonstrate and document the type of progress that you've made as an organization for executives or different people who are tasked with owning the process and improving the process. So what we're able to do is track key metrics within your source systems and help you understand from a process perspective how your on-time delivery is improving over time, or how your perfect purchase orders are improving, day sales outstanding. You name the key metric, we'll be able to measure it and then show you over time how it's trending and improving or decreasing. So that's a high level. Again, the Discover Enhanced methodology is what I'll be touching on in the demo momentarily. So I think you'll see how this technology translates to any business process, but for sake of simplicity, we'll just look at an example for purchase to pay. So in this example here, this is a 12-month snapshot, but again, with Celonis, we're able to provide you with a real time, as real time as you'd like with your business process. And also, we're able to, on average, have you up and running with that digital twin in 4 to 8 weeks. So time to value with Celonis is very quick, since we're able to have you up and running within a couple of months at most. So looking here at this example, there's just over 1 million POs, or purchase order line item numbers. Sometimes we'll refer to these as cases, but it's that unique identifier that we're tracking through the system. And then it has a net order value of over $2 billion. And you'll see here at the bottom that there's more than 655 different ways that purchase to pay is executed within this organization. So keep in mind that this data that you're seeing, there's no canned data or no templates. This is what we're able to provide as an output an hour after we do the extraction, or if you're doing a real-time connection and up and running with Celonis, that you're able to have on a continual basis. So this most straightforward path, sometimes you guys may have heard it called a happy path or a gold standard or whatever terminology you use, but oftentimes that is the most common path, but there are also times where the most common path that's mapped out within your processes is not the ideal process flow. So hopefully for all of you, that's not an issue today. But what we can do is animate this most common process that's happening 420,000 times. So within P2P, you can see that it starts by creating the purchase rec, creating the PO, sending the PO, recording the goods, scanning the invoice, and then the process is over. But what you might be naturally asking yourselves is what's happening the rest of the 600,000 times. And so with Celonis, from a discovery standpoint, we can really start to uncover what's happening the second and third and so on most common times in the process, and more importantly, what are key variations that are indicating specific violations that are not ideal for the business. So you'll see in the second most common process, 150,000 times, the exact end-to-end viewpoint of how the process is unfolding based off of your own data is that we're skipping creating the purchase rec and starting straight up with creating the purchase order. So this may or may not be an issue. It just depends on the organization and what things you have in place. But where things start to get interesting is in this third most common variant. So you'll see that there's nearly 150,000 price changes. And you'll see the process starts as normal, but then after the PO was cut to the vendor, we're going in and changing the price, which is a bad customer experience, but also it's a lot of rework. So 150,000 times, let's say 5 or 10 minutes, is a lot of rework that translated to over $2 million in spend, or 12 FTEs for this organization. So bad customer experience, bad rework activity, not ideal. And since we're capturing those date and timestamps that I mentioned to you earlier, what we're able to do is also show you from a throughput time perspective, not only how many times are things happening, but just as importantly, what's the throughput time between each activity, so you can start to identify the impacts on the process. So for this price change, again, you can see here that from sending the PO to recording the goods received, typically takes 8 days, but whenever we introduce price changes, from a median perspective, we're adding 9 days to the process. So again, that's not ideal and has impacts on your internal SLAs downstream. The last piece that we can look at here is automation. So especially within SAP and most source systems, there's often a user type associated with each activity that's executed. So within SAP, we can tell if that's a manual user or a batch job, an API call, whatever the case is, an RPA bot. We'll be able to understand if it's a user, if it's manual versus automated, and then help you understand which areas or which activities of the process are most ripe for automation. But also, it's, again, important to remember, as I mentioned earlier with Siemens, that you want to make sure you're automating activities that make sense from a streamlined process perspective. Because again, if you're automating every single activity of recording the goods received, sometimes it might be ideal if the previous activity was sending the purchase order, but if it's a price change, different things can have negative impacts on the process. So again, intelligently understanding where should we apply technologies and tools such as RPA. And I'll fast forward to give you like a 40,000 foot view, but if you wanted to see from a very high level what your processes would look like, you all would see something like this here. And honestly, 655 variants isn't very much. I was working with a Midwest customer here, and for their order to cash process for just 3 months worth of data, they had over 100,000 variations of their order to cash process. So for every sales order for order to cash, there were 1 in 3 sales orders had a different way that they were executed. So that's obviously provides tremendous opportunity for improvement. And again, we're just looking from a high level at a discovery aspect, where we'll start to uncover how you can look at root causes is by going into this overview tab. So here, what we're able to do is pull in any dimensional data that's present within like Oracle or SAP, are the dimensions that are present within the data. So we can dynamically filter on any key activity that we want to take a look at. And right now I'm doing more of a bottom-up approach of manually understanding what are some of the root causes. Next, I'll show you how we do a top-down approach from an automated perspective, showing you what are all the key violations that are happening. So looking here at this price change, we can dynamically filter on any price change that's happening within the process. And have a specific view at only the 152,000 POs that have that price change. So we can filter over time. You see there's a spike in September and October, and we'll see here that Umbrella Corporation is the #1 offender from a vendor perspective. But we can even start to get more granular and understand what's driving these price changes for Umbrella Corporation. So you'll see here that it's bulbs that's predominantly causing these price changes for Umbrella Corporation. It's happening more so in IDES in Germany than in North America, so we can really start to drill down and understand what are the things that are driving these price changes. So for this company, it was actually a master data issue. So 17,000 times for bulbs alone, that's not even counting all the other types of material groups, but they were having to go in and do rework because the master data was not updated. So what Celonis will do is intelligently notify you ahead of time when there are signs in the data that master data is not updated due to multiple price changes that are happening in the system. So that's just a high level of how we're able to drill down to the data from a manual perspective. But I think what most of you would find interesting next is how we do a top-down approach to that so that we don't have to sit there and manually slice and dice through the data. So with Celonis, I'll touch on the monitoring piece a little bit more in a little bit. But what you can do is you can upload via Visio or BPMN your to-be desired process flow and let Celonis run your as-is process against this built-out process that you'd like to see executed. So if you don't have a built-out process via Visio or BPMN, you can use Celonis to mine out what that process should look like. So either way, you're covered. But then what Celonis will do is launch an automated FIC app analysis to show how your digital 20-year business process is operating over time. So here you'll see how the conforming cases are stacking up to the non-conforming cases, what the violations are, and I'll touch on the conformance a little bit later for the monitoring, but you'll also see how, from a throughput time perspective, how the non-conforming cases are impacting that compared to the conforming cases, and the impacts on steps, automation, et cetera. But what you'll see here, 3M is a major customer of ours. They call this their hit list, so their SVPs, VPs can walk in, and for all 16 violations that are happening within the process, they get to go in and perform a root cause analysis, where instead of manually slicing and dicing, you can leverage our machine learning and artificial intelligence to tell you what are the key dimensions that are present within the data that have the strongest correlation to these given violations that we've just found. So you'll see here that it's Umbrella Corporation with Chicago, bulbs, over this 12-month span where there were those 16 violations, and we just drilled down into one violation. So with a matter of a couple quick clicks, we know exactly what's causing that process to be non-conformant. So next, if you want to, I'll take a look here. You can compare by company code to company code, region to region, old system to new system, bot to bot. You can benchmark the data in any way you want so that you can understand how can we apply best practices from one user group to another and start to improve and start to drive the most change, the positive change from best in class or better performing business processes from one part of the organization to another. So we can compare how different variations are unfolding for certain organizations across another, and we can go down into throughput time, automation rates, et cetera, basically the exact same thing that I showed you before, but we can look at two different groups and have a lens to dissect it however you want to. From a details perspective, so again, I told you this is based off of the as-is data, so there's no canned templates. You can drill down to each individual PO or each individual sales order or each invoice number, depending whatever process you want to look at. You can go to each individual line item number. The thing that I'll focus on next year is for PII Social. So oftentimes there's a presentation that I was sitting in on earlier today with Dorothy Bass from Stant. I don't know if she's in here, but she brought up some good points that oftentimes managers think they know how the processes are performing or how they're being executed, but when you go to the actual users in the process, the processes are happening a completely different way. And there's not really a good way to monitor what's happening in the process. So what Celonis is able to do is we can diagnose from any activity that you want to maybe reduce. So if we'll look at maverick buying here, it's where somebody, first step in the process, they're scanning the invoice, and that's a major compliance issue. So they're stepping outside of the built-in policies, which is having impacts on taking best advantage of the purchasing terms that are available, but also just major compliance issues as well. So we'll take a look at activities that start with scanning the invoice, which is maverick buying, and look only at these specific cases. And then coming over here at PII Social, what we can do is across the organization, we can start to understand who are some of the power users versus who are some of the people that maybe need some opportunities for coaching. So what we can do here is understand from a user perspective, no matter what activity you're trying to look at, maybe it's price changes or maverick buying or whatever activity that you want to reduce or maybe improve, you can see how it's being performed across the organization for, again, to help you understand who has opportunities for improvement and for coaching versus who maybe are the people that are doing well, or maybe what are the batch jobs that are causing these different violations that are happening in the organization. So having complete transparency so you can ultimately improve the needle in your business process. So next here, what I'll focus on is Action Engine. So as earlier I mentioned, the left side of the screen, we had to connect and discover. Next, we'll look at how we enhance and monitor the process and start to operationalize the insights. So with Action Engine, again, what we're doing, we're taking all those violations, those 16 violations that are happening, and notifying you in the business in real time when those are taking place, but also if there are historical downstream effects based off of a combination of activities, we'll be able to tell you when those things are happening so that you can know what's going to take place or what the negative impact is going to be before it even happens. So here within Action Engine, we'll look at sourcing and procurement. And there's different areas that we might want to drive as an organization, but these are different areas we can be proactive about how we're improving the business. So maybe you want to reduce operating costs and maximize automation, so we can look at optimal POs. We can understand how can we better process and faster process POs so we can speed up the PO handling, or maybe how can we interact intelligently with suppliers so that we receive better on-time delivery and help improve working capital and just better customer experience as well. So I can just take a look here at optimal PO quality, but I think you'll get the idea. What we can do is surface to the business or whoever's involved with that specific part of the process. This here is a master view, but maybe James has his own specific user view. We can isolate that down so that James can take a look at only the activities that he's involved with. But we can see here by switching from a purchase rec to catalog material, James has a better chance of reducing operating costs by 15% and decreasing rework likelihood by 15%. Other examples that we might want to take a look at could be, again, within improving the on-time delivery, so speeding up how that process is, how the POs are being handled, but also if we want to take a look at maybe how we can better negotiate terms with vendors and suppliers. So I'll go back to this specific tab for Action Engine, and you can see here that Jacob is being notified to prioritize a customer-relevant purchase rec. So maybe you have 10 customers who are very important to you all, but there's not really a way for you today in order management or within order to cash or whatever the case, whatever business group is trying to prioritize vendors. You can go in here and make sure that Jacob has the ability to process those high priority POs so that there's a high likelihood of on-time delivery. So again, these are just more intelligent ways that out of all the things that users in the business or process owners could be doing, here are the activities that have the highest impact on the organization, and really is how we're operationalizing those insights from Celonis. I'll take a look here since we've got a little bit of time left here. But here I'll take a look at our app store. So depending on the process, P2P, AP, AR, order to cash, those are our most common processes. And so what you're able to do is, since depending on the source system that is present, what we can do is, let's say you have SAP ECC for purchase to pay, there's going to be specific process connectors that are pre-built that allow us to do that transformation very quickly. But also, not only do we have specific process connectors, but we can then, once we do the transformation and build out that data model for purchase to pay, there are specific canned analyses that are pre-built based off of your source system that other customers have developed, so that instead of spending 6 months and trying to understand how can we drive action out of this purchase to pay analysis, what we can do is take a look here in SAP ECC, and within purchase to pay, for example, we can see here that there's many different applications that are able to be applied directly to your data model on top of your specific source system that we're connecting to. So depending on whatever initiative you're trying to improve, whether it be touchless orders or price changes, vendor scorecards, automation, purchase recs, whatever the specific KPI that you're trying to improve, what you're able to do is go into that specific analysis and have a canned data set that instantly allows you to achieve rapid time to value, depending on whatever applications you're wanting to take a look at. So from a demo perspective, that's all I really wanted to show, just from a timing perspective. But what I didn't get to touch on today is how Celonis, we're also now doing what's called task mining. So sometimes you have activities that are logged within SAP or Oracle or whatever source system you're using. There's also activities that happen outside of that. So whether it's in email or Excel, another recent announcement as of a couple days ago is that we actually now have the ability to take the data from those specific interactions from a data perspective and user perspective, and also tie together any email activities or Excel activities to give you that full picture of how the process is unfolding, not just from a source system perspective, but also a user data perspective. So to give you a holistic end-to-end understanding of how the process is unfolding outside of those source systems is very powerful, that a lot of our customers are extremely excited about. So next, I'll just go back to the PowerPoint here. So kind of bringing it back full circle. Starting with that discover, enhance, monitor methodology. This here is for P2P, but we build these out for any process, and also depending on what the use cases are most important. But let's say within purchase to pay, you're really trying to work on optimizing working capital, improving productivity, or just reducing compliance. So what Celonis will do is discover all the key violations or things that are happening within your process, and understand what are the root causes that are driving those PO changes that are resulting in early payments or cash discounts versus payment time, whatever lens you're trying to look at improving that we've identified as a problem based off of an as-is view of the data. We're then able to build out specific action engine skills associated with those so that you can enhance the process proactively instead of having a post-mortem viewpoint. And again, this is where we go from process mining to enterprise performance acceleration. But again, we're operationalizing those insights so that you can improve the business today and even before problems happen. And then lastly, we're able to monitor the impact that you've been able to, that has been as a result of your process over time, so that you can see the improvements that you've made, to be able to quantify to your leaders and to the organization how much better that business process has gotten. And then apologies, having technical difficulties. So here, just wanted to wrap up with a quick look at all different companies who are using us. And if any of you are looking to learn more about Celonis, we have a Celonis conference, the Superfluid World Tour in Chicago on October 30th. And so it's coming up here in a few weeks. You'll be able to learn from customers like Sysmex, Siemens, GE Healthcare, and we'll also have customer stories from Harvard Business Review as well, where they'll be giving a keynote speech. So if you want to understand maybe how other Celonis customers are leveraging our technology, or if you want to connect with other prospective customers, this might be a good event for you to check out. I put on the back table by the camera there different postcards that you can all grab on the way out if you're interested in attending. So we've got about 10 minutes left, so that's all I've got for this presentation. So thank you. If you have any questions. So yeah, if anybody has any questions, we can use the last 10 minutes for Q&A, and if not, then give you 10 minutes back to your day. So, yeah.
Are you guys, do you have on-prem options, or is it just cloud-based options?
We're shifting to be totally a cloud-based solution. However, if you have to have something on-prem, we can set up hybrid scenarios where you can have the extractor on-prem and then set up a connection to the cloud to access our interface. So trying to push towards all cloud, but again, if there's extenuating circumstances, like we have customers within the government, sometimes we have to do a hybrid deployment scenario. So that's a good question. Yeah.
When you connect and plug in, does that take any impact on performance of our system?
No, so that's a very common question as well. We can do delta loads so that it's not improving your production, but I'm not a solution engineer, but basically what we do is set up a connection extract server so that your source systems or whatever systems of record need to communicate with Celonis. You'll push that information to Celonis, to like our extract server, and then we will update the business process over time and allow you to draw the insights from it. But as you can imagine, working with companies like Siemens and half the Fortune 500, there's always a big concern that it doesn't hamper their production. So we have things in place to prevent that from happening with the extractor. But I don't really know much more detailed than that. You'd have to ask an SE. Any other questions? Yeah.
Perhaps you touched on this already. I was just curious how you manage the highly manual process. So if there's human intervention somewhere in the process flow.
Yeah, so it depends. What we're able to now do with the task mine is capture when those activities are happening so that you can quantify how often those things are happening and then make decisions if maybe some of those activities should be digitized. But what we'll often uncover is huge bottlenecks in the area or black boxes. Let's say from activity A to activity B, there's 10 hours of throughput time or there's 5 hours of throughput time. So you'll be able to start to uncover why there's such long throughput times. And then again, with the new task mining, we can start to mine what's actually happening. Are they going to Excel? Are they going to Salesforce? Are they going to email? What's taking them so long? And how can we, from a strategic perspective, drive positive change to what's currently happening? Yeah.
Is there reporting in there that does recommendations on which processes are best suited?
That's usually something that we do, like when we sit down with the customers, is understand where are the biggest pain points and initiatives, and from a process perspective, based off of what you're telling us, what would we recommend for you to start up by looking at? So, but oftentimes, just based off of what initiatives you have and what the problems are, we can give a pretty intelligent recommendation just based off of doing this with hundreds of customers. So, any others? Okay, hang on. Okay, so go to Action Engine. Let me go to Finance. So this is based off of your own, let's say you're looking at AP or AR, to be based off of the invoices. So depending on what the recommendation is, I mean, it just depends where the process is falling off the rails. But for a duplicate invoice example, what Celonis will automatically pick up is that there are multiple invoices that have identical reference numbers. So it really is just based off of your own process. There's nothing like canned in here. What we'll often do is if we're looking at a specific process like AP or AR, is we'll work with you as we're getting the Celonis stood up with which specific action engine skills would be most relevant so that you can drive the biggest impact to the business. But really, just again, depending on the process and what the issues are that are uncovered in the discovery phase, we'll work with you to build out those action engine skills. But it is based off of your actual process and your own data. Did that help? Sorry, I don't know if that helped.
I'm looking at that text right there where it says 2 invoices with identical reference numbers. That's collected in the discovery and then processed automatically in that item.
Exactly. So Celonis will pick up that for those different invoices, they have identical reference numbers, and so we'll intelligently notify you guys that that's taken place. Yeah, good question. Any other questions? Good. Okay. Well, we've got 5 minutes that you can all have back to your day. So thanks for your time, everybody. Really appreciate it.